Welcome back, class. I'm Professor G, and what I want to do for this video lecture is I want to give you a very brief introduction to Islamic history and sort of touch on the main points that you should know anytime you're having a discussion about, or anytime, especially since you're going to be writing about Islam, some of the major features, the major historical features of the Islamic religion. First and foremost, you should know that Islam as a religion is centered on and around the Prophet Muhammad, who is perhaps the most important person in all of Islam. This is because, as we'll see here shortly, the Prophet Muhammad is the one who receives the Quran. He's the one who meets with the angel Gabriel, who receives the Quran, which, as I mentioned in my last video lecture, is the Word of God. So, to understand Islam, we have to understand the life of the Prophet Muhammad. So, Muhammad is born around 570 AD into a nomadic tribe in modern-day Saudi Arabia known as the Quraysh. The Quraysh, as I mentioned in my last video, are a group of merchants. They're traders. They are transporting goods across the Middle East, transversing the desert in order to move goods from place to place. And like a lot of nomadic tribes in Saudi Arabia at the time, the Quraysh were centered around, their base of operation was around the city of Mecca. Now, I mentioned before that Mecca was the home of the Kaaba. And during that time, in the 6th century, the Mecca was a sort of religious, a holy city for the pagans of that region. And the Kaaba was a shrine, it was a center of worship that was very popular amongst these wandering tribes. So Mecca was the place that you would go to in order to resupply, in order to rest for a bit. Again, these are nomadic, semi-nomadic tribes, so they're wandering around from place to place. And by tribes, think of like large family groups consisting of a couple of hundred people, men, women, and children, as well as their animals that they brought along with them. So various tribes were situated around Mecca, and Mecca is sort of the trading / religious hub. So you would go there to resupply, but you would also go there to worship. And the central place of worship was the Kaaba. Now the Kaaba, if you want to, you can Google Kaaba. The Kaaba is today probably the most holy site in all of Islam, but it predates Islam. And the Kaaba was basically this rock that was believed to have fallen from heaven. It was what today we would probably call a meteorite. Although we haven't been able to test this stone, we haven't been able to see what it's composed of, so we really have no idea what it is. It could be a pseudo-meteorite, as some people have claimed, just a rock that people believed had fallen from heaven. But nevertheless, the people in Mecca believed that the stone had fallen from heaven. And again, ancient people viewed the heavens as holy. They viewed it as the realm of the gods. So anytime you have a meteorite that falls to the earth, this is seen either as a special sign or a gift from the gods or something the gods are trying to convey. So the Kaaba is built on this stone that fell from heaven and that these tribes would go and make their offerings to. And this is the sort of religious environment that Muhammad grew up in. As I've mentioned previously, Muhammad grew up in a very diverse religious climate. He was confronted, and he obviously met some Jews, some Jewish people, some Christians, and also within Mecca, he would undoubtedly have come into contact with all these various pagan groups. And so the central question that plagued Muhammad for most of his life was, well, which religion should I belong to? Which religion is the true religion? Which religion is the right religion? So Muhammad prays and he fasts and he goes through the religious rituals. He's described as being a very pious man. Every night he goes into the desert to pray. Well, one of these nights, Muhammad is visited by the angel Gabriel, the same Gabriel that we see both in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. And the angel Gabriel reveals to him the words of God. It's a divine revelation by Gabriel. And what Gabriel reveals to him will become the Quran. Now, a misconception that you may have is that Muhammad wrote the Quran. He didn't. The Quran is, Muhammad was considered to be, thought to be illiterate. He couldn't read or write, as most people at the time. Again, in the ancient world, when we're talking about literacy rates, they're extremely low, especially compared to our standards. We live in a society that's like 95+% literacy rate. Back then, it would probably be the exact opposite, like a 5% literacy rate. So Muhammad was probably illiterate, but he begins receiving these messages from the angel Gabriel. He begins to tell people what the angel Gabriel has been revealing to him, and eventually people write those messages down. And it's when they write it down, this is the Quran. It's the message that Gabriel gave to Muhammad that Muhammad then relayed to the scribes. And the Quran it's different from other Western religions as far as the holy text goes, especially from Christianity. I don't really think a lot of Christians would say that the Bible is literally the Word of God, right? So we have examples, we have examples in the New Testament, especially, for example, in the letters that Paul writes for, like in the book of Romans, when Paul is giving his opinion, he says, I, Paul, not God, say this. He's explicitly saying, hey, this is just my opinion. Now, it may be a more informed opinion than yours, but it's still my opinion. And the gospel writers are simply relaying what they observed Jesus doing, and there's some variation there. They don't always relay the exact same information. There are some inconsistencies in their account. There's some differences. For example, in two of the Gospels, we have a tale of the wise men coming to visit Jesus, and the other two we don't, because different Gospel authors are concerned with different things. They weren't interested in relaying history as we think of history today. They're simply interested in relaying the messages of Jesus. The Quran is different, right? So it's the angel Gabriel literally telling Muhammad what God has said, and Muhammad telling this to the scribes. So there's not a whole lot of interference there, and there's not a whole lot of translation issues there. So the Quran is considered to be the Word of God that Muhammad received directly. Okay, so we'll get back to Islamic theology here in a second. So Muhammad receives the Quran while he is living in Mecca, and he starts to tell other people. Obviously, he had a revelation from God. He starts to say, hey, this is what God told me. This is what God is teaching me. And the Quran stands in stark contrast to the religion and the culture of Mecca at that time. So remember, Mecca is sort of the religious hub for paganism in that area. And the message that the Quran is giving Muhammad, the message of the Quran, is that God is one. There is no God but God. This is a declaration of profound monotheism, that there is only one God and there has only ever been one God. So as you can imagine, this didn't really sit well with the people who were coming to Mecca to worship, because they wanted to make sacrifices and offerings to their own tribal deities, perhaps their ancestral deities, the deities that their family has worshipped for the past few hundred years. And then all of a sudden Muhammad comes along and he says, no, these deities are false. They're idols. You should be worshiping the true God who has revealed his message to me. So Muhammad doesn't make a lot of friends in Mecca. He's eventually kicked out of the city, and he's kicked out of his tribe, and he has to flee to the city of Medina, which is just north of Mecca. He flees to the city of Medina that was more receptive to Muhammad. If you want to think of it as the mayor of Medina, kind of the head tribesman that had the most power and control of Medina, welcomed Muhammad, and he welcomed his message. Eventually he becomes a convert of Muhammad. And this fleeing from Mecca to Medina is known as the Hajj. And as we'll see in the next video, the Hajj is one of the pillars of Islam. It's one of the pilgrimages, the journeys that is required of all Muslims. But it takes place in 622. The Hajj, you are mimicking the flight of Muhammad and eventually the return of Muhammad to Mecca, because this is precisely what happens. Muhammad flees Mecca, but he eventually comes back. And when he comes back with an army, and he conquers Mecca. And when he conquers Mecca, one of the first things he does is he cleanses the city of its religious impurity. He cleanses the Kaaba. In much the same way that Jesus chases out the moneylenders with the whip in the New Testament from the temple because they have corrupted this holy site, so Muhammad cleanses the Kaaba. He gets rid of all the pagan idols, all the pagan gods, and he establishes this now as a place, as a religious site, not of paganism, but of Islam. And in fact, the Kaaba is now believed by Muslims to be the place where Abraham first offered up his son Ishmael to God as a sacrifice. Now, the Hebrew Bible, it's Isaac, so don't get these confused. In the Quran, Ishmael. In the Hebrew Bible, Isaac. Anyway, so Mecca now becomes the holy city of Islam. When Muslims pray 5 times a day, when they pray, they face towards Mecca. Mecca is the religious hub of Islam. So Muhammad comes back, he takes Mecca, and it's from here that Muhammad begins to build up his empire. He establishes a Muslim empire. And we'll get back to that here in a second. But first, let's talk about the different holy books of Islam. So I've mentioned the Quran. And the Quran is the central text of Islam. It's what all of Islam is based around. The Quran is to Islam as the Gospels are to Christianity. Christianity is all about the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Where do we read that? We read that in the Gospels. Likewise, the Quran is the crux of Islam. It's what all of Islam rests upon. It's the central text. Whatever the Quran says goes. But we also have the Hadith. The Hadith. So the two sort of holy books we have is the Quran and the Hadith. Now, as far as the Quran goes, there's not much debate within Islam. You either accept the Quran or you don't. There's not really a whole lot of wiggle room there, right? But with the Hadith, it's a very interesting text. So the Hadith is the sayings of Muhammad. It's what Muhammad said about the Quran, or maybe what Muhammad said about particular social situations. So remember, Muhammad is just a mouthpiece. The Quran isn't Muhammad's opinion. It isn't Muhammad saying, I believe God is telling me this. No, the Quran is God speaking through Muhammad. The Hadith is Muhammad's commentary on the Quran, or Muhammad's commentary on society as heard by other people. And since it's this as heard by other people, there's various levels of Hadith. With the strongest level being those people who were most close to Muhammad, who said, yes, Muhammad said this. And the further down the line you go, the further removed you get from Muhammad. So the Hadith it's a collection of sayings of what people heard Muhammad say. And the most certain Hadiths are those written by Muhammad's close friends or families and those who we can most trust, right? But the Hadith, it talks about all sorts of things. The Hadith is a commentary on the Quran. It's a commentary on the social situation of the time. The Hadith mentions everything from how many women you should get married to the prescriptions of what constitutes just war, jihad, which we'll talk about in the next video, which the Quran doesn't really mention. It elaborates on the Quran, and it speculates about what the Quran may or may not have, may or may not mean. And since these are the sayings of Muhammad, they're highly valued. They're not on the same level as the Quran, but if anybody knows the Quran, of course it would be Muhammad. Okay, so the two holy books, the Quran and the Hadith. So let's talk about one of the major divisions that happens in Islamic history. And it's a division that's still going on today. It's a division that people are still fighting wars over today. And that is the split in Islam between the Sunni and the Shia. And this division goes all the way back to the year 634 following the death of the Prophet Muhammad. So after Muhammad dies, the question becomes, well, who should succeed Muhammad? So again, Muhammad had created a physical dynasty, a physical empire. Islam is not just a religion as we think of religion, because we tend to think in the West, we think of religion as like a private matter. It's something that I keep to myself. I may believe certain things, but these are just my beliefs. Islam it's bigger than that, because it's not just a religion, but it's also establishes a political reality. And this is what had happened in the past. Muhammad had established a political empire, a political system. And so the question after Muhammad's death was, well, who exactly is supposed to be in charge? Most people said that Muhammad's closest friend, Abu Bakr, ought to be the next caliph. The caliph was the king. He's a religious / political head of the Islamic State. And so the question is, well, who's to be the next caliph? The Sunnis are the group that supported Abu Bakr. They supported Abu. They said that Muhammad had appointed Abu, that Abu is the rightful successor to Muhammad, rightful successor to this political state. The Shia disagreed. And the Shia disagreed because the Shia believed that only people who were physically related to the Prophet Muhammad have the right to be caliph. And so they said that Muhammad's cousin-in-law, Ali, ought to have been the caliph. The the Sunni today represent a majority of Muslims. Statistically speaking, most Muslims are Sunni. Shia represent a small minority within the Muslim community. And this is not just about a political division, okay? It goes deeper than that, because the difference between Sunni and Shia is not just about who was the rightful heir to the Muslim political state, but it's also about the role of the caliph. What should the position of the caliph entail? What should this person be doing? Okay, so the Sunnis believed that the role of the king, the role of the caliph, was to be the political head of the empire, was to do the things that kings normally do as far as the maintaining the economics, the armies, and the political situation with other nations, foreign policy, that sort of thing. But that also he was sort of the religious figurehead of Islam. Abu is the one who puts together the Quran. He oversees the production of the Quran. And so he's seen as kind of like the religious figurehead of the church, kind of. Like he's the one that makes sure that the church is actually, or in this case, the mosque is actually abiding by the teachings of the Quran, that they're doing the right thing, that we're doing the right thing as a nation, that we're behaving as a nation as good Muslims ought to behave. For the Shia, it's slightly different. The caliph is a political ruler, and he is the religious head of the body of Muslims, but for the Shia, Ali has some sort of special insight into the Quran in much the same way that Muhammad had special insight into the Quran, according to the Hadith. So according to the Shia, the caliph carries more religious weight. He has spiritual insight that other people don't have access to. He can know more about God's will than us common folk can know about God's will. And therefore, he's more capable of making religious proclamations. And in fact, sometimes the Caliph of the Shia makes new religious proclamations that the Shias are expected to abide by that may not necessarily agree with what's in the Hadith. Things change over time, and the proclamations of the Caliphs change over time. Okay, so that's all I got for this video. If you tune in for the next video, we'll talk more, generally speaking, about Islamic theology as a whole. All right, guys, see you next time.